In today's video, we're going to be talking about why I'm switching blades. And it's not what you think. So let's get started. Hey everybody, thanks for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about why I'm switching blades, and like I said in the title and the beginning of the video, it's not what you think. But first, before we get started, I just want to say thank you all for purchasing some of the merch from the Teespring store. That helps out a lot, support this channel. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And this is the latest design. Let me see if I can get that in the lens there. And the logo says it's woodwork or it isn't, because pretty much that's what it is all the time. And people, they want to tell you they can find it somewhere else cheaper. Well, you tell them then go buy the cheaper thing that's not going to last. All right, so let's get closer to the table saw. I have some examples set up and I'll explain to you everything about these blades and why you should be switching your blades and what happened to me and how I figured it out. So let's get a little closer. Okay, so you can see I have a couple of saw blades set up here on a piece of plywood on top of the table saw. I also have a blade that's already mounted in the table saw because that was the last blade I was using for cutting plywood. Now, this, I still can't even believe this happened because these are quality blades. This rip blade alone was $90. This was a $50 blade, which is a general purpose blade, and I'll explain to you what happened there. And this was a $98 80 tooth plywood and melamine fine cut blade. Now these are all really good quality blades. Anything that's close to 100 or definitely over 100, good quality blades. So this is not the fault of the machine or the blade. This is a lack of switching the blades, and I'll explain that to you really quick with this combination blade. Okay, so back in June, I was working on a, or it might have been July. Back in July or August, I was working on an outdoor potting bench, and it was all made of solid white oak. And I used a combination blade for my ripping and cross-cutting in that solid wood. Now, I didn't realize that the blade, I guess, couldn't handle that much volume, and it was overheating. And what happened to it was these gullets that are actually made for expansion during heat and contraction, they actually welded together, and this blade now has ridges in the blade. And what happened was, the way I realized it was I was getting these cuts on the oak that were slightly curved in the middle, and I couldn't figure it out. And I was checking the machine 1,000 times. I checked the fence on the machine, I checked crosscut fence, I checked the sliding table, and everything was aligned perfectly. And I said, how can I be getting a curved cut if everything is running true and straight? And then finally I said, let me take a look at the blade, shut the saw off, and by hand I spun the blade, and the blade was wobbling side to side. So I checked to make sure it wasn't loose on the arbor, and it was tight. I take it off, and because the blade sits in the saw like this, I didn't see this until I took the blade off the machine. And I couldn't believe, what had happened. And like I said, it's got those ridges and it's completely out of balance. So that led me to come to the conclusion that I'm going to go back to what I was doing, and that is switching blades every time I do a different function. As you can see right now, I have an 80 tooth blade in there. That's for cutting plywood and for fine cross cuts. But it's not recommended for cutting like solid white oak that's more than an inch, or more than an inch to an inch and a half thick, because that blade will fail because of the hardness and the thickness of that wood. So for something like that, then you could use a 50 tooth combination blade just to cross cut. But from now on, as far as the ripping goes, I'm switching back the way I used to do it to a 24 tooth. And this is a full kerf, 1/8 inch thick, full kerf, heavy duty ripping blade. This blade, it runs probably around 80 to 100 bucks, but it's well worth it, because when you run solid pieces of hard lumber through the saw, this is going to give you not only the best finished rip line that you're going to get, but it's also not going to burn out, because the less teeth it has is the less material that the gullets will be removing out of the way when it's doing its ripping process. It has the vented expansion pieces inside these little machined pieces inside the blade so that it won't warp. And because there's, like I said, less teeth and you're running with the grain or the fibers of the wood, and the gullets are larger because there's less teeth, they're actually able to extract that wood dust and sawdust out of there to keep the heat down. So obviously, you know, that's specifically made for ripping. Now, if you start cross-cutting with this, you're going to have a problem. So now let's move on to the plywood blades, and I'll explain to you another problem that I found, and it was the fault of the blade that I was using, but it was my own fault for buying this blade. So let's talk about that. Okay guys, so check this out. This saw is equipped with a scoring blade. Now this scoring blade, what it does is, as the plywood, it's only used for cutting the plywood. When the plywood enters, this blade, spinning the opposite direction, scores the bottom of the veneer on the plywood so that you get a nice clean cut, splinter free. And then the plywood blade takes over and makes the cut on the top. And in result, if you have a good quality blade on there, you get a good quality cut out of that blade, and you will have no splintering. So now, I was using a standard 60-tooth plywood blade. I was running the plywood through the saw, and this may be a little bit hard to see. Hopefully it can focus. If you look here, right on the edge of the plywood, you're going to see a little notch. There's a step here. And that's an actual, it's almost like a rabbit in the wood. And that goes all along the length of the bottom of the plywood. And that was from being produced by the scoring blade. And for the longest time, I could not figure out. I just chalked it up to the scoring blade on this unit being junk. However, this, even though it's a decent plywood blade, if I would lower the scoring blade down and I would just use this, I would get a good clean cut on the top of the plywood, but I would still get that splintering on the bottom because obviously scoring blade's not doing its job. It's lowered in the table. I wasn't using it because of that. So I started to look at the specs of the saw and what the blade requirements were, because this is not a full kerf blade. So all these plywood blades and even ripping blades or the multi-purpose blades, you're not getting, unless you actually look at the packages of the blades and it says full kerf, 1/8 of an inch, you're not getting the size probably of the saw's riving knife or anything that the recommended manual tells you that you need. So another thing that you need to look at also is the recommended RPMs of what that blade can actually handle. This saw is 5 horsepower. It's an industrial saw. It throws a lot of RPMs spinning that blade. So you need to get a blade that's going to be able to handle that. So when I switched, what I did was I switched over to a full kerf 80-tooth plywood blade, not only for the fine finish of the 80 teeth, but because it's 1/8 thickness of the teeth on the blade, that full kerf, it actually now matches my scoring blade on the unit. So now I can go back to using the scoring blade again, and it's producing fine finish, beautiful cuts with almost no sanding to be done on the edges of the plywood after the cuts are made. So what's my purpose of this video? My purpose of this video is to completely educate you on the use of saw blades and taking your time to actually take 2 minutes to go ahead and change your saw blade for the different functions that you're using it for. So this way you get a better end result. Okay guys, so just a bit of a final thought here is, if you're out in the field and using a contractor's table saw, you're pretty much not going to be switching blades on and off, because you're not going to be really doing fine woodworking out in the field at someone's house most of the time. You're not going to be cutting mahogany in someone's house or oak and putting it up, you know, as trim. And if you are doing it as trim, if you're using oak for crown molding or wainscoting, you're going to be more than likely almost all of the time using a miter saw with a 80-tooth fine finish blade on it. Alright, so thanks for joining me in the shop today. I really appreciate you guys supporting the channel with the Teespring store. Don't forget to check out the new design. I hope you guys like it, and I hope you guys get something out of this. And I'm going to be posting a link to all of the different saw blades that I use, and they're going to have an Amazon affiliate link that also supports the channel. Now, don't be fooled that this is a sliding table saw. This also has a 5/8 inch arbor, and these are 10-inch blades. So now just make sure that if you do have a slider, and you do have a larger slider, and a lot of the larger sliders have a 12-inch blade or a 14-inch blade, those usually have a 1-inch arbor. So make sure that if you do go and look at the links for these blades, that you're looking at the right size arbor for your saw. Other than that, if you have a standard saw, 5/8 inch arbor and 10-inch blade. All right, guys, thanks for joining me again, and I hope to see you next time.